I'm just going to lubricate the retard gear train and the self timer or delay action with some graphite powder, and basically all I do is I sprinkle the graphite powder in there, work the mechanism multiple times, take them outside, blow away all the loose graphite powder, and then they're ready to install. Only lubricate pieces like this with graphite powder if they have been scrupulously cleaned and are absolutely free from any oil or grease. Otherwise the graphite will just clump up where the oil is, and you'll find that they don't work smoother than they did before you started cleaning them. They'll work considerably worse back when I've got these lubricated. I'll start with the retard gear train. I'm going to cock the shutter. Take the retard gear train, which goes in here. Pull this lever back so that this catch is pulled out towards the outside of the case here, and it's not sitting on top of that tab. Otherwise things don't go well. You heard that click into place. This tall headed screw here goes at this end. Just check that that lever's free. This screw at this end. The screw here goes through quite an enlarged hole in the plate of the retard gear train at that end, and that's to allow you some adjustment. So I'll slacken it off and show you how much adjustment you get. So you can swing the retard gear train inwards or outwards. Outwards to speed the shutter up, inwards to slow the shutter down. Now the main spring in the shutter is very good, like a new one, so I've pushed that inwards to slow the shutter down, because that's probably what's going to be required in this case. Right, let's see the shutter run. Here we go. That was 1 second or thereabouts, and that's certainly what I would expect. So now we have the self timer or the delay action. This has a head of a screw on the base there that has to drop into the base plate wherever it drops in one of these detents, and the slot here goes over the shaft on this lever, this one here. That's the setting lever. Let's pop that into place. Hopefully this will run smoothly. Run that back a bit. Okay, that's seated in position. Just felt it drop down, and that's held in with a single screw. And there's no adjustment for the self timer. That's activated by the internal cocking ring when that comes round to that position. You'll see it's running down there now. And when it runs down, it pulls against this lever here, which pulls this lever out of engagement with the blade actuating ring and allows the shutter to complete its action. So that's all good. Check the screws on that. That's probably going to work quite well there. I can put my speed train, internal cocking ring, this catch, the cocking pinion and the shutter speed settings cam plate in place now, and we should have a complete and working shutter. I'll just put a light wipe of molybdenum paste on that shaft. This should drop in. That sits in this space. The tab here is going to come up and cock the main cam at that position. This internal cocking ring, I usually give that a wipe around the inside and the outside edges with the molybdenum paste. It doesn't need much. The spring on it, the spring on the end there, goes over this post here. That's the screw with the post sticking out of it. Should drop into position. Now the coupling of this with the pinion here is such that the get this in place. That is one tooth out, I believe. That looks better. Okay, so as this comes round, this internal cocking ring, as that comes round, it lifts this arm, which releases the main cam in the sequence of actions. Where's that small lever we need to put in place? This one here. Now there's a spring on the bottom of this, so that spring bears up against this pin here. We need to get this seated correctly so that it is tensioned up. No, I didn't get the spring hooked in there correctly. That time I did. Okay. I put the speed settings cam plate in position. And here I just want to wipe around the centre, wipe around here, and here in particular, this is where this engages with the retard gear train against the pin on the retard gear train, and that's where it sets the speeds. And that'll probably do. You can give that internal surface a very light wipe, but I don't know if it makes much difference. This goes on here. Make sure that it's not sitting on top of the B lever at that point. And I'll put its retaining clip in place. Check that it moves, and it all appears to. So we'll cock and release the shutter next and test it. I want to see what the speeds are like. Now I've got a little tool with a D-shaped end on it to engage with the shaft. That's nice, but you can achieve the same thing with a pair of tweezers if you're careful. That's our shutter cocked, and if I set a speed of say 1/8 of a second is a handy thing to set. You can judge 1/8 of a second fairly well, making sure my fingers aren't anywhere where they shouldn't be. Can use the same tool I'd use to cock that can be used to lift the shutter release. It sounded good. It was possibly a bit fast. Just got to make sure my fingers are free from any moving parts here. That was definitely fast. That was too fast for an 1/8 of a second, so I need to slow the shutter up. Just have a run it through the self timer as well. Set the self timer. Let's set the shutter to 1 second. And release it. On the right pinion. See, the diaphragm's already closed down. The shutter's closed. It opens and closes. So that looked pretty good to me. Okay, so I'll go and test those speeds, come back with the result and make adjustments accordingly. No, those speeds are good enough. It'll be fine. I had to take these springs off so that I had the shutter in the closed position before I tested the speeds. But no, that's all good now. I'll get these springs back in place. Self timer appears to run down smoothly. All is good. These are fiddly things to get in place. That's that one and this one. Right, so you can see the track of that spring there. Actually it's rubbing against the shaft there, but it might not be the case once it's all in the housing. So that shutter's pretty good. That's just about ready to go back in. Alright, we'll need our case. The flash contact here, you have to get that plastic tab through this slot in the back of the case. Now the plastic is almost inevitably somewhat folded over, so that's entertaining, but you know, all these tasks can be done. Other people have done them before you and they weren't Superman either. So I need to get this tab in place. Putting the cart before the horse. That was it. That was it. That's in. And we have our retaining ring, which is this thing. Yeah, it's a little bit rough, so something there is a bit off, but that's okay. That's probably not going to cause me a problem. Yeah, I just heard that seat down better. It probably means that the spring dropped into the recess in the back of the case that it should have dropped into. I'm just running these down with my fingernails there. I don't want to have to engage at all until I have to engage at all. Let's just check the action of this now. Cock it. And release it. That seems to run quite nicely. We'll set the self timer, we'll do that again. Cock it. Set the self timer, I've got to hold this tab in and release this. Shutter's running down, you can see the diaphragm's already closed down. There was our shutter firing. So that's all looking very good. Alright, I'm going to tighten that retaining ring, and I think I can use a traditional spanner to do that one, because we're not getting down into a tiny groove in the body. I think this tool will do the job nicely. Alright, that didn't need much. Okay, so that's that part. I think I should mount that back on the front plate that goes on the camera and how the focus mount really. We can do the final close-up on the shutter once it's back on the camera. I think that's probably the best approach at this stage. Okay, so let's get these pieces together. Fold that flash contact down. That's why it's important that that plastic remains intact behind it. This is the cocking pinion. Let's put this in place. Make sure that the release is coupled. There are 4 screws that hold this in place. They do look a little bit battered, which is just another sign that things have been assembled and taken apart multiple times over the camera's life. Okay, that's looking pretty good, and that's just about fit to go on the camera body, I believe. Now, you're best to put the rear lens group in at about this stage, because it's difficult to get to it otherwise to tighten it up. It only needs to be finger tight, but you just can't get your fingers in once you assemble a few more bits. So I think I'll do that. I have the rear element here. I'll clean that and screw that into place. Now, unlike on the 3Cs, where the body here extends out past the glass, on the reflexes the glass is exposed in the middle. So don't be in the habit of just putting that lens element down on its face. It's not going to be good for it. Just blow loose dust off that lens. Now there's certainly something visible on that inside surface. Something dusty looking. So taking some glass cleaner, I'll lightly wipe that off, rotating the cotton bud or Q-tip as I go. And here I'm just using normal domestic glass cleaner. That looks good. The outside surface, I'll quick wipe of that. That looks pretty good too. Okay, I'll give that one more clean and pop that into place. I'm rotating this and watching the light from the window reflect on it to try and pick that I've got rid of any smears that might be on the glass surface. That looks good. Alright, that's nice and snug. I'll clean this glass surface. That's unfortunately with me it's almost inevitable I manage to get my fingers on there again at least once before I've got things closed up. It's usually useful to clean both sides of the lens because it makes it easier to judge whether you've got the first surface clean, the one that you was most important, which was the inside surface. It's much easier to judge that once you have the outside clean as well. Well, that's looking pretty good to me. Well, I think that shutter's ready to go on the camera body. Okay, well everything's pretty much here. I'll just rotate that so it's in the, so the D, the flat of the D is in this plane. I've got to get this coupled in here, this coupled in here, this just goes into that position there. This is our flash contact, that couples that flat piece there. So let's see if it can be done. Yeah, it went on. Okay, shouldn't act so surprised. Now we've got our screws. We have 4 screws which come through here and fixed it to that ring behind it. And with luck, let's have a look. Just looking to see where that ring is below. I'm not seeing it in a useful place. What I'm concentrating on here is this hole here, which has got that that should line up with the other one, so we can poke the ring out, the dress ring. I'll take this back off. Let's get this plate in the right place. Yeah, this is what I'm talking of. This thing here, there's that hole there I'm concerned with. These are the 4 screws holes, and this is the hole here. I should be able to poke that thing out from. Let's have another go. Get this back in place. Just line those holes up. Should be about there. Okay. I'll find the 4 screws and do that up. I have to hold that ring up underneath so that it's not too low for the screw to reach it. Well, I think that's 2 of them in place. It's certainly 1 of them in place. Yeah, it's looking good. Okay, so that's our 4 screws. So the front's held on now. This is our focus here. I can tell that that won't go back all the way, so I know that the position's not correct. Let's just see if we can get it somewhat correct. Adjusting the focus I'll do. Yeah, that's round to the infinity stop now. Let's just do 2 of those up. Check that this moves freely. It does. I'll do the focus adjustment when I've got everything else up and running. And this hole visible in the plate here. You can see there, that hole. That's where I should have been able to feed a piece of wire up to push out that dress ring that was held in here. And of course I couldn't, because this whole thing had been put in the wrong place, so the holes didn't line up. Well, the shutter's on the camera, and in theory I suppose it should work. Well, we better test it. Well, I'll put the shutter release button on there, or the shaft at least. Let's try cock the shutter. Well, that looks promising, and it appeared to work. Let's set it to a nice slow speed so we can see what's happening. Yeah, that looked pretty good to me. You'll see that the diaphragm was pretty much closed completely up. That's because it's got nothing holding it back, because it's positioned by these rings, which are not currently present. But the shutter certainly worked. Didn't appear to be any hesitation there. Well, that's looking very promising. So what's my next move? I think I better replace that missing screw on the front plate, really. I don't know what's happened to that. I'll put the top cover back on the camera temporarily and make it easier for me while I'm getting everything back together on the front, and also when I come to set the focus on this camera. I'll just pop a meter back in here. Make sure my shutter release is in place. There's the shutter release button. Our film release button goes on there. And the top cover can go on. Now my film release button's moving in the wrong direction. Oh, that looks good. Alright, a couple of screws in there. This top cover is particularly battered. I think I'll be looking in my parts boxes and finding one that doesn't look like it's been in the wars to such a great extent, and using that instead. Is I've always tried to keep my spare parts when they're absolutely required, but this camera deserves a better top cover than this one. Try the self timer, set that to a nice slow speed. That's all looking very good. Okay, to close up the front of the shutter next, just requires putting housings and so forth in place. This piece needs to go on first. It only goes on one way. It's got a little alignment slot here which fits over a pin visible down in here where you can't see. Like that. Well, of course I've got to put the shield on the inside of that first. Does that go on first? No, it doesn't. That's alright then. Let's get my 4 screws. These are always a bit fiddly to put in place, because they're down in the groove here. It's difficult to get at them. And that screw's doing its best to fall into places I don't want it. Let's get cunning. Better I put the screws loosely in here to start off with. Then lower this into position. Which would be about there. And see if the screws will start. That one started. Alright, so I've got all 4 screws started there. I can tighten those up. Right, that's that piece. This plate goes on the front. Now it goes in a certain position because that hole there, from memory, lines up with this boss on the back of that plate. Which would make it somewhere like that. There's a pin on here which drops into a slot, so sometimes it's got to push it to get it to seat correctly. That appears to be good now. And there are 4 tiny screws that hold this front plate on. Alright, with the 4 screws in position, I can now tighten those screws up. If you just put the first screw in and tighten it up, you can be sure that it will be slightly misaligned and you can't even get the other screws in. Very good. Well, these front rings next, I think. I'll put these front rings in place. This is the aperture ring. Obviously you want the scale at the top. So just hook it over here, drops in place. You can feel it seat. Here's the shutter speeds ring. The notch here lines up with this tab on the shutter speeds dial. The settings plate, and there's a little detent here. That seems to be fine. Now we need the front plate on here. So this ring needs to go on, and that little cutout there must couple up to the shutter thing at that point. But getting this on's a bit tricky. That's where it'll be when it's in place, but we've got to get this ring on. This is what holds it all together. And inevitably, to get this on, you need to lift that one back, line this up, get it hooked over that loop, get this piece coupled correctly, which would be there, and something's not popping down there. That's better. That's in position. Now something you might strike is that the number plate here is pushed back so that this ring won't seat behind it. Just push that number plate back towards the centre. Okay, now that's right. And there are 3 tiny screws that hold that front on, and these are chromed brass and easily marked. So try not to slip and mutilate them. These ones aren't great, but nothing on this particular camera is great. It's earned its living well, I'd say. When they're all in place, nip them up. Check that the controls work. Let's set this to a nice slow speed, and it's a F4 at an 1/8 of a second. Let's do that. My aperture setting lever's not shifting. There's something wrong there. Let me undo this. It seems better. Where the teeth on these 2 rings come together, they might have been sitting one on top of the other, teeth to tooth, instead of like this. So it was, when I tightened the screws up, nothing wanted to move. Let's see how that goes. Okay, so if I set a shutter speed to an 1/8, we'll set the aperture to F4, I think. Let's see what it looks like from the front. That looked pretty good to me. You can see I'll put a longer shutter speed on there. You can see that the aperture's closed down. That's sitting at fully open at the moment, F2. You see it closes down to F4 there. So that's all working correctly. Quite happy with that. Check those 3 screws again, make sure that they're snug. Then I'll fit my front lens element in place, and I will check the focus, and I'll check the focus by using a ground glass screen at the focal plane where the film would be, and a jeweler's loupe, and I'll be viewing a target out on the horizon, effectively at infinity, and I'll be checking to make sure that when the focus scale ring reaches the end of its stop at the infinity position, that the lens, the image is focused best on the screen. In fact, the screen I've got is a focus screen taken from an SLR. It has a focus aid, it has a split image on it, focus aid, and as a result it's quite easy to pick when things are in focus. If you hadn't disassembled the camera or made any changes to the mirror, then you could just view the image in the finder and use that as your guide to whether the lens was correctly focused. But in this case I've had all sorts of things going on here with the mirror catch for the mirror and bits and pieces, and I don't have the prism back in it at the moment, so it would be very hard to tell. Anyway, let me check this and come back to you once it's all sorted out. Well, with this at the infinity position, the image is not sharp. I need to bring the lens in further, so I'm going to slacken these 4 screws off. Back the ring away from the infinity position, retighten the screws, check again, and what I hope to achieve this time is to be able to get a point of focus on an infinity target. When I've got that accurate, I can slacken those 2 screws, move this ring around to the infinity stop, tighten the 2 screws, and I should be good to go. Simple. That's all good now. I can tighten those 4 screws up. And my focus is now correct. When it comes to the infinity stop here on the focus scale ring, an image at infinity is correctly focused at the film plane. Now, with a focus scale, and we need this trim ring, the one that wouldn't come loose when I was trying to get it out of the camera. And if this is the correct one, because I've got pieces here of multiple cameras at the moment. Basically this just sits in here, drops in, covers the screws. And our focus scale ring, here's the piece with the numbers, fits on over the top. Is held in place with a single screw, and getting this in position is not always easy because it has to be tucked down into the groove on that chrome ring. Let's move this round to where the screw hole is, fixing it, which is right there. One small screw holds that in position. If I'd been clever, I would have put that carefully to one side so that I don't misplace it, because it's a small one. I found the screw I was looking for. It's very, very short. Now, decisions. The focus scale ring I've got here is in feet. The rewind knob I've got for this camera was definitely made for the German market. I have a metric focus scale ring here, so I think I will make the 2 pieces match and put a metric focus scale ring on here. If I can get it to fit. sure it's looking fairly promising. Getting the focus scale ring to seat neatly into that chrome trim is sometimes a bit of an act. It's mostly in, but it's not in round here. Just a slight distortion on that quite flimsy name ring makes it hard to get it to drop neatly into the groove. It's round here that my problem lies. And here I'm just manipulating it into place with a wooden toothpick so I don't scratch it. Yes, that's pretty good. The holes line up there. And then just find the screw and put it in place. Now check that that is seated. Appears to be. Everything's good. Now, all we need is the little focus knob, of course. Which fits on over the top. I'm happy with that.